Hi there, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. What I'm going to feature today are some videos from ACTS17 Apologetics. ACTS17 Apologetics is an apologetics website that is run by David Wood. And David Wood is a former atheist turned Christian. He became a Christian after he went to prison, and he actually shared a cell with a Christian. And you're wondering, well, why did he go to prison? He spent his first part of his life as an atheist, but also as an atheist who had been diagnosed with psychopathy. And so he had done some very violent things, and through reason, he came to Christianity. And so we're going to go through a few of his videos, and we're also going to listen to a video from Nabeel Qureshi. Nabeel Qureshi is a former Muslim who became a Christian, who wrote a book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, and his testimony is quite powerful. So today we're going to cover some of those. So stay tuned. Let's first listen to David Wood's argument from reason. Now, let me add, one of the reasons why David Wood is so popular and has about 400,000 subscribers on YouTube is because he's funny and he is got a really good message and a very strong voice. So let's listen to the first couple of minutes of this argument from reason.
Need to meet that special someone.
Hi, now that your man Thag is out of the way, I'm Dokmar. I'm a Scorpio.
Here's the rub. When theists and naturalists argue about the world or morality or God, we enter the argument as if we're on some sort of intellectual neutral ground. Well, we all agree that our cognitive faculties are functioning properly, so let's take it from there and see what we can prove. But things aren't that simple. If naturalism is true, the causes of our reasoning ability are particles in motion, random mutation, and a selection process that favors passing on genetic information, not truth. The process that selected human reasoning ability is the exact same process that gave us the claws of a tiger and the colorful buttocks of a baboon. We wouldn't rely on a big pigeon perch to get us from Manhattan to Brooklyn. Why in the name of common sense would we rely on a mutant physical ability selected by a process that at least occasionally favors multicolored butt cheeks to get us to a correct view of ultimate reality? Why would we rely on reason to get us to true beliefs at all? It wasn't made for that, according to the naturalists. Naturalism, then, doesn't just rule out knowledge of God, it rules out knowledge of pretty much anything. It's not only a threat to belief in spirits, it's also a threat to belief in science. And I have to ask, since you naturalists tell me there's no afterlife, what happens when you commit intellectual suicide?
Again, very powerful way to present stuff. So now, next we're going to go to why he's a Christian. Why did he come to Christianity? So what's happening here is David is recounting his experience when he was in prison, and he would compete against a Christian cellmate that he had, and sometimes they would compete on things such as fasting, and he really put himself through hell. And then he started reflecting on his life, and in doing so, that helped him come to Christianity. So let's listen in.
I feel like I've just been stomped into the ground, and when I thought that I felt like I'd been stomped into the ground, I had another flashback. One night I was walking home from a friend's house and a storm hit. There was rain was so bad I could barely see. Lightning was striking all over the place, and I looked up and mockingly said, "Oh, is that supposed to scare me? If you want me to believe in you, better come down here and make me believe." I wasn't serious, but given my circumstances in the jail, I had to start wondering if God had taken it seriously. That normally wouldn't have been an option. I didn't think like that. But since my entire worldview was crumbling, I wasn't in a position to dismiss alternatives. But there's a problem. If there was a God involved in all of this, if right and wrong weren't merely useful fictions, I was in all kinds of trouble. Not just for what I had done, but for what I was. How is the worst person in the world going to ever do the right thing? There's no magic switch that I can flip and, oh, now I care about other people. So how was I going to do anything right? And then it hit me that there are two possibilities. Either I'm violent and selfish and uncaring, and that's just the way things are, or there's someone who can help people like me. Either I'm all messed up and I just had to live with that, or there was someone who could deal with this sort of thing. And when you start thinking like that, I'd say you're about 2 inches away from becoming a Christian, because when we ask ourselves, Who, out of anyone, ever, who had the ability to take psychologically, spiritually, and morally shattered people and give them new life? We get a list of one. You get a list of one. There's one person on the list. He's the one who said, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I didn't know if Jesus was who he claimed to be, but I knew that it was Jesus or nothing. It was Jesus or nothing. If anyone has God's stamp of approval, it's the guy who rose from the dead. History is filled with dead options. Jesus is the last living option.
It's a very powerful testimony. So now we're going to go to his friend, Nabeel Qureshi. What happened was David was a roommate of Nabeel Qureshi, apparently in college, and Nabeel is a pretty fantastic guy. He's unfortunately, he's since passed, but he had very powerful testimony prior to doing so, and we'll go to that right now. In this video, we see Nabeel reenacting an experience that he had in a dream.
So I said to God, you know what, God, forget I asked for a vision. How about you provide me a dream? Any dream, and if it confirms what I just saw in my vision, then I will become a Christian. And that night, I had a dream. It didn't take weeks, it didn't take months, it didn't take more than a few hours, if that. He gave me a dream that night. It was me standing at the threshold of a door, a narrow door. Not in the door yet, just outside it. My toes are at the line of the door. It's a narrow door, so it's about 3 feet wide, just wide enough to fit me, and probably about 6 to 7 feet tall, just tall enough to fit me, and about the same depth in length. Just so it's a doorway, not just a door. At the other end of a door is David, my friend, sitting at a table, and it's a round table, and within that room are hundreds of people, all sitting at tables, and there's food laid out before them, and they're all getting ready to eat, but they haven't started eating yet. They're waiting, as if for a speaker to come and start whatever it is, a speech, a session, to shut the door and start speaking. But they haven't started eating yet. And I look at David and I said to him, I thought we were going to eat together. And without turning back, he says to me, you never responded. That's all the dream was. Me at a narrow door saying, I thought we were going to eat together, and him at a feast saying, you never responded. I woke up and I immediately knew what that dream meant. That room was heaven. That room was the kingdom of God. And I was standing right outside the door. I was not in yet, because I had not responded. God gave me a dream that was so clear that I did not have to interpret it. But it was even more clearer than I had anticipated. A few hours later, I called David and I said, David, I had this dream. And he said to me, I don't even have to give you my opinion on it. That's right out of the Bible. And I said, what? And he said, go to Luke 13. And I went to Luke 13, verses 20 through 29, and you read it. And it's the people asking Christ. He said, will many people enter the kingdom of heaven? And he says, many will try to enter, but few will be able. Make every attempt to enter through the narrow door. And people will be standing at that door knocking. And that's exactly what happened in my dream. I was at that door. The door had not been closed yet, but the opportunity to come in to that feast was still there. I just had to respond.
Very powerful. So what happened between David and Nabeel, it's pretty neat, because David became very knowledgeable in the Muslim faith, and he debates many Muslims. So what we're going to go to next is a debate with Shabir Ali, who's a Muslim apologist, and David is in a debate with him. So we're going to listen to a portion of David's rebuttal to Shabir. To add a little context to this debate, what they're going to talk a little bit about is the Muslim interpretation of Jesus. There is a passage in the Quran that seems to imply that Jesus was never crucified and that God took Jesus to heaven prior to the crucifixion. So many Muslims assume that that must mean that a person took Jesus's place and was crucified and never said anything. So David is going to brilliantly address this point, and he's also going to speak a little bit about Jesus's resurrection itself. And he'll sum up with a call to Muslims that they should pay attention to.
Check, check. Thank you, Shabir.
In my opening statement, I argued that Jesus died by crucifixion and that a number of his followers were convinced that he had risen from the dead and appeared to them. And I showed that scholars regard these facts as indisputable. Since there's no plausible alternative that accounts for these facts, it looks like we've got a miracle. Now, Shabir and I obviously disagree on some things. We're going to go through those. But before I address the disagreements, I think it would be nice to address some agreements between us. And we have three important areas of agreement already. First, we agree that something miraculous occurred. Whichever Muslim explanation Shabir favors, if it's not naturalism, then it is going to involve a miracle at some point. So this is not like a debate between a Christian or a Muslim versus an atheist where you have supernatural explanations competing with natural explanations. This is going to be a discussion about supernatural explanations. And that's relevant because if God is doing whatever he does, whether it's the Muslim version or the Christian version, if God is doing whatever he does for a sign to other people, we would expect God to get the message across. We would expect the people of that time to catch on and to be able to pass this on. Why is that relevant? Well, the message that was passed down to us was the resurrection. So if something else happened, it doesn't look like that sign really made its point. Second, we agree that the vast majority of Muslims are apparently wrong about this. If the substitution theory is wrong according to the Quran, if some other view is correct, if Shabir holds something other than substitution theory as the correct Muslim view, then since most Muslims adhere to some version of substitution theory, that would mean that the vast majority of Muslims over the centuries have been wrong about Jesus. And I would agree. The question is, are any more wrong about Jesus? But think about this. Why have so many Muslims over the centuries been wrong about Jesus, if they are wrong about Jesus? Why have they been so wrong? Could it be that the Quran simply isn't clear enough in what it says about Jesus' crucifixion? And this would bring us to the third point of agreement. Shabir and I agree that Surah 4, verse 157 of the Quran is extremely vague and confusing. I discussed the most common Muslim interpretation of the text in my opening, but Shabir's right when he says that that verse might not mean what most Muslims think it means, and that there are all kinds of interpretations, especially when we examine the context, both the literary context and the historical context. The context is Muhammad had already received and delivered revelations that Jesus is the Messiah and that he's born of a virgin. Some local Jews responded, what do you mean? His mother obviously committed adultery or something, and we killed him. He can't be the Messiah. How can he be the Messiah if we killed him? And so Allah responds to this, saying, they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. And so, Shabir has acknowledged that we can interpret that so it was made to appear to them in different ways, but think about this. What was made to appear to them? Was it Jesus in a physical form? Was it something else? Or did it just appear to them as if they had victory over the Messiah, and it appeared to them that way, but they didn't, because Jesus was raised? What's interesting is that if we examine this text in the light of certain other things that the Quran says about people who are dying, we start to see another interpretation emerge. So, chapter 3, verse 169 of the Quran, do not think of those who are slain in the way of Allah as dead. Nay, they are alive with their Lord and have their provision. Here it's saying, hey, if you think someone's dead, he's not. He's with Allah. So if you think you've killed the Messiah and the Messiah has been exposed as a false Messiah and a false prophet because he's dead, no, he's alive with Allah. Chapter 3, verse 145, no person can ever die except with Allah's permission and at an appointed time. So no one dies except by the will of Allah. And when we bring that alongside
chapter 8, verse 17, which is revealed after the events at Badr, where certain Muslims came back and were talking about how many people they had killed in the battle and so on. And Allah says, chapter 8, verse 17, "It was not you who killed them, it was Allah who killed them." Now think about what that is saying. What do you mean, I didn't kill him? The guy came at me, I stabbed him, he died. What do you mean I didn't kill him? But Allah says it wasn't you that killed him. Allah is the one who killed him. So the Muslims thought they were killing these guys, but they weren't killing them, Allah was. So here, if death is the plan is only in accordance with the will of Allah, and Allah is actually the one who's doing killing in certain situations, now think of, they killed him not nor crucified him. Well, it would be perfectly consistent with that passage to say that what the verse is really saying is that the Jews didn't kill Jesus. Even if Jesus died, they weren't really killing him. He's going to be with Allah. But if it's according to the will of Allah that Jesus dies, if that was some sort of purpose of Allah, then Allah is the one killing him, it's not you. Or just it's denying that they had any real victory. Because again, the point of the Jewish objection was, we killed him, so he's a false Messiah. And the response is, no, Allah raised him up unto himself. So it's perfectly consistent with that verse to interpret it in a number of ways. You can interpret this according to substitution theory. You can interpret it in many other ways. But it is perfectly consistent, and there are people who have interpreted it this way over the centuries, to mean that even if Jesus was killed, the Jews just didn't prove him wrong because he's still with Allah, and anyone who dies, it's according to the will of Allah. Now, what does it mean when this verse is unclear? Well, guess what? That's the only verse in the Quran that refers to Jesus' crucifixion. Generally, as a rule of interpretation, if you have an unclear verse, you go to a clear verse to explain what the unclear verse means. You interpret the unclear in light of the clear. But there is no clear verse in the Quran. That's it. That's all you have on the crucifixion of Jesus. And if you try to go outside that verse elsewhere in the Quran to figure out what happened to Jesus, all the rest of the evidence seems to indicate that he didn't die. I mean, that he did die by crucifixion. If you consider, it seems to assume that Jesus died. For instance, chapter 19, verse 31 of the Quran, Jesus says that Allah has enjoined on him prayer and zakat as long as he remains alive. Think about the implications there. Jesus has to pay zakat as long as he remains alive. Well, if Shabir's right and Jesus never died, then Jesus is paying zakat in paradise with Allah, and he's been doing it for nearly 2,000 years. Zakat, according to Islam, is for things like feeding the poor. So are there poor in paradise? Zakat is for to pay those who fight in the way of Allah. Is there warfare going on in paradise? If Jesus is right there, then absolutely. There's poverty and hunger and warfare in paradise because Jesus is paying zakat to pay for these kinds of things. Or Jesus died. You also have various passages in the Quran which, taken without interpreting them in the light of Surah 4, verse 157, which is what Muslims do, right? Any verse that pops up about what happened to Jesus, they translate it and understand it in the light of Surah 4, verse 157. But if Surah 4, verse 157 is itself unclear, then you should just interpret these verses in the most natural light. And passages like Surah 3, verse 55, where Allah says to Jesus, I will take you and raise you to myself. The language used there, when it's used elsewhere in the Quran, usually refers to Allah taking someone to paradise after the person has died. So, is there a way out of this? Is there a way out of this when the only verse we have that would deny the crucifixion is unclear, and other passages in the Quran seem to weigh in favor of Jesus dying? Is there a way out? Is there something clear? Because even those aren't very clear. Is there something clear? Well, yes. And the Quran gives us a method to interpret what happened. Because the Quran says chapter 61, verse 14, that Allah aided the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost over those who rejected him. So according to the Quran, all we have to do is look to history. Look to history and say, what happened? Who won? Who became uppermost? Well, if there were some early Muslim followers who believed something like that, if Shabir's going to argue that there were these, people before the writing of the Gospels and they eventually lost, well, guess what? They weren't the true followers of Jesus then. They didn't win. So the Quran gives us a way out, and the Quran affirms that the true followers of Jesus won and became uppermost. We know what the people who won in any sort of disagreements of Christianity over time, the people who believed in Jesus' death and resurrection won. So the way out, according to the Quran, is to say, here's an unclear verse, we don't know what it means. Other passages of the Quran seem to suggest that he did die, but we don't know. But the Quran tells us where to go if we'd like to know, and it tells Christians to judge by the gospel. It says in chapter 10, verse 94, speaking to Muhammad, if you are in doubt as to what we have revealed to you, ask those who read the book before you. Referring to the people of the book, that's Jews and Christians. So Allah commands even Muhammad to go to the people of the book to verify revelations. Allah says, he commands Christians in Surah 5, verse 47, to obey the gospel, right? We have to obey the gospel. If we don't, we're no better than those who rebel. We judge by the gospel. Well, if we judge by the gospel, we know what the gospel in the 7th century said. It said that Jesus died by crucifixion and rose from the dead. We ask the people of the book, in this case it's Christians, we believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. So if you go with some other interpretation, you're rejecting Allah and calling the Quran a false revelation.
Absolutely brilliant. So I hope you enjoyed that. I have another clip that I'm going to show you that is when David uses some of his humor. It's a Scooby Doo clip, and it's quite amusing. In this clip, David makes a point that you can try to be a skeptic, but sometimes you take things to the limit. And he explains this with Scooby Doo. Interesting way.
The first few seasons of Scooby Doo followed a predictable pattern. In each episode, a ghost or a vampire or a monster would be terrorizing a mansion or a town or a carnival, and it would seem like there's something supernatural at work. But a few Scooby snacks and a corny song later, the mask would come off and the gang would find out that there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for what once seemed mysterious.
Richard Dawkins!
After seeing this pattern repeated over and over again, those of us who grew up watching Scooby-Doo concluded that there's a natural explanation for everything. Then one day, the gang goes to Moonscar Island, aka Zombie Island. The odd thing about Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island is that the ghosts and zombies turn out to be real. But Fred, after so many years of unmasking fake monsters, is too skeptical to accept that he's finally dealing with real monsters. At first, Fred's doubts are entirely warranted. When Lena tells him about the ghost pirate who haunts the island, Fred says,
"Well, no offense, Lena, but it's probably just some guy in an old pirate suit trying to scare off the local kids."
Then the ghost of Morgan Moonscar writes, "Get out" on the wall and levitates Velma, but Fred isn't impressed.
We've been levitated before, and there's always a magnet or wire somewhere.
Soon, the gang notices that they got video footage of the ghost while he was writing on the wall. Fred doesn't budge.
It's probably just a hologram of some guy in a pirate suit.
Fred even comes up with a motive after learning that there's a rumor of lost treasure on the island.
Aha! I knew it! It's some guy disguised as a pirate ghost trying to scare everyone off the island.
That's when things start to get awesome on Zombie Island. Shaggy and Scooby fall into a hole, exposing the bones of Captain Morgan Moonscar. Moonscar's ghost reunites with his skeleton, forming a zombie right in front of them. They make it back to the house and prepare for dinner, but the ghost of a soldier comes out of a mirror. Fred, however, is still convinced that it's all a hoax.
It's just guys in masks.
He even comes up with another possible motive.
Maybe there's oil under the island.
Oh, my!
Meanwhile, dozens of pirate zombies and soldier zombies rise up. They're coming out of the water. They're coming out of the ground. Where's Rick Grimes when we need him? Daphne's the next best thing, so she channels her inner Ronda Rousey and judo flips a zombie, temporarily stunning him. She decides to put Fred's mask theory to the test, but soon realizes that it's not a mask. Does Fred agree with her? No! Fred not only thinks it's a mask, he thinks it's obviously a mask.
It's the fakest, cheesiest mask I've ever seen.
Fred takes over mask removal duties for Daphne, but the zombie's head comes off instead. The zombie then reattaches his own head. How's Fred going to explain this one?
It must be animatronic.
Animatronics, ladies and gentlemen. But zombies continue coming out of the water and out of the ground, and Daphne wonders how far Fred's willing to go with his animatronics explanation.
And I suppose they're all animatronic too?
Well, it is a possibility, Daph.
That's when Daphne drops an atomic truth bomb. Fred isn't really a skeptic.
You're not a skeptic, Fred. You're in denial.
Ouch.
And that is a fun little play on Scooby Doo. So what we're going to do now, I've also listened to some of the chats that David Wood has had with other Christians, and he recently had, or somewhat recently had, Dr. Michael Brown on his channel. And I'm really excited to say I'm going to have Dr. Brown on my channel on the 4th of January coming up in 2020. So stay tuned for that. But let's listen to what Dr. Brown and David Wood had to say to each other. So in this clip, Michael Brown and David Wood talk about Isaiah 53. And Isaiah 53 is really a game changer, and it's super interesting because it's used quite frequently by the Jews for Jesus when they are in their efforts to convert Jews from Judaism to Jesus, because they realize that Isaiah 53 quite clearly points to Jesus. It says things such as, he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. What's really interesting is Dr. Brown is a former Jew. Jews for Judaism. He grew up as a Jew, and I think he was around 17 years old when he ended up converting to Christianity. But prior to that, he probably hadn't encountered Isaiah 53, possibly, who knows. But here's what Isaiah 53 has to say, and here's what these two have to say about it, and I think you'll find this information quite interesting with respect to Jewish people.
Yeah,
Yes.
it can be surprising. I have a friend, he's on the program here regularly with me, but Anthony Rogers and his wife's family are Jewish, and he was having a conversation with one of them one day, and Tony said, well, here, just let's look at some of this. And he reads Isaiah 53, and the guy says, look, we don't believe in the New Testament. Get out of there. We only believe in the Old. We only believe in what you call the Old Testament. And he's like, that is it. It's right there.
Yeah,
So,
we that is an almost universal experience when you come from a home that's not that religious, so that they would almost certainly not be familiar with the text, and you read it. I've seen people, family members, people close, get angry, lose their temper. Others say that, one of my friends, when he read it to his dad, same thing. We don't believe in the New Testament. He said, no, Dad, this is the Bible I was given when I was bar mitzvah, the English Bible. Here's the rabbi's signature. And he said, no, somebody changed it. So, yes, it retains tremendous power. My friend Mitch Glazer with Chosen People Ministries, based in Brooklyn, some years ago, he invested a lot of money in an Isaiah 53 campaign. He took out a full-page ad in the New York Times just with the text of Isaiah 53.
Wow.
Who is this talking about? And then, if you went in and out of the Lincoln Tunnel, for some months, there were these giant billboards with a snippet of Isaiah 53. Who is this speaking of? So millions of people literally saw it coming in, going out, just getting the message out. So yes, read it and say, who's this describing? Who does this sound like?
yeah, so that's awesome stuff here.
It really is awesome stuff. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to go over to listen to David and IP, who's called Inspiring Philosophy, Michael Jones. I've had him on my channel too. He's a really great guy. They're going to be talking about Apologia's video on morality. So Apologia issued a challenge for Christians on morality, and these two refuted much of the challenges. So we're going to go to that next. So Apologia is going to point out the moral argument. So what is the moral argument from a Christian's perspective? The moral argument basically says that if we have objective moral values and duties, then we must have an objective source of moral values and duties. And the objective source would have to transcend generations and eras and cultures if it existed. So the claim is that yes, we do have objective moral values and duties. In fact, we have a lot of evidence from major world religions, from atheism, from humanism, that humanity all shares this duty to follow the golden rule. And a lot of atheists will try to look at that and they'll say, well, that's a deontological perspective. We would actually ground it in consequentialism. And so you can see right here what Apologia has out there. He's got maximizing well-being, the consequence of well-being. But you can't ground or have the source be the same as the consequence. You can't ground something in well-being because well-being is a consequence and it's a human construct that's derived, and also varies from person to person. As David Wood is going to point out here, he's going to talk about how someone's maximization of well-being could go in contrast to somebody else's. For example, he could talk about a serial killer feels like that he's maximizing his own well-being when he goes out and murders people, makes him feel really good inside, makes him happy, makes him joyous. However, that obviously is not maximizing the well-being for humanity. So it's very problematic in that way. So let's hear what they have to say about this particular issue, and then also what Apologia asks as a challenge.
Noted. I'm seeing a correlation here, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Do we want to keep going here?
Yep, let's go. I want to get to what he gets to when he talks about biology and everything.
All right, here we go. I'm starting at 5:15.
Please leave your thoughts in the comments of this video, or find the link to the original tweet in the description of this video.
I'm pausing it right there at 5:21. He's telling people if they have an example of something. Again, guys, think about what he's doing here, right? So a lot of what's in the Bible, are things that other people, other people would agree with. But he's going to say that those other things that people would agree with, like the things that atheists would agree with, are, I think this is what he gets to in the end, are just kind of the way we're wired, because our species is geared towards maximizing human well-being. And so those are going to be part of our wiring. So he's saying, find something in Bible morality that non-Christians, that everyone pretty much besides Christians would also agree to, that has nothing to do with maximizing our well-being.
Yeah,
and that's.
Before we get to that, I want to point out something that is in Bible morality. So what we have in the Bible is we have the idea, or what we have in life, I should say, is the idea that we have intuitions and we have reasoning. And so a number of people who've studied psychology and studied morals have realized that we have these intuitions, and a lot of times the intuitions align with our moral duties to do what's right. And then we have reasoning, and we go through this reasoning process. And that could be aligned in a lot of ways to the maximization of well-being and consequentialism. But what's going on right here is we look at the Bible and we say, well, there's something beyond just simple intuitions. For example, if I go and I stand at the edge of a pond and I see an alligator in the pond and I see it lurch out towards a small child, my intuition is to run and save my life, right? But my conscience, and that's something that's from Romans 2:15, my conscience tells me no. Save the child, risk your own life. So it's not maximizing my well-being to save the child. However, I would choose to save the child due to my conscience, and that's a part of biblical morality. It's something that is explained to us through biblical morality. But beyond that, I also would like to add in the idea of Jesus and his own self-sacrifice. He sacrificed himself for our sins. And so that also wasn't maximizing his well-being at the very moment when he was crucified and he was beaten and he was tortured. That was not maximizing Jesus's well-being at that point in his time. However, in the long run, he ended up doing something that maximized all of our well-being because he's opened the door and the gates to heaven. So let's hear again what David and Michael Jones have to say more on this matter.
We'll get to this at the end because he brings God back into it at the end.
All right. So he's saying where people can post it and stuff. We'll just go ahead and watch it until he starts getting to his points again.
Station going there on Twitter. I greatly look forward to hearing your insights. Unfortunately, no criteria meeting examples have been offered so far on Twitter. General ideas like love and kindness would be affirmed by a criteria maximizing well-being, so would therefore be part of the green portion. Ideas like aversion to taking the Lord's name in vain would be yellow, but would not typically twinge the conscience of a non-believer, particularly if they were raised outside of a Christian culture. Some suggested, potentially reasonably, that there would be no blue section, that green would wholly be a subset of yellow, that the Bible encompasses all things that improve well-being. I suspect that this is not the case, but I could grant that here and it wouldn't change the challenge. It would still be, what is an example of something in the yellow portion? The blue part wasn't actually part of the question. And why do I even ask the question? Well, if we don't have a good list of things in the yellow that are simultaneously affirmed by the intuitions of significant portions of non-believers, then it would seem that the green portion is what is meant when apologists appeal to objective morality, not the yellow circle. However, it would also show that everything within this objective morality can be arrived at merely with the principle of minimizing pain and maximizing well-being. At the same
I'm pausing it at 6:43.
Good point. I was going to say that.
There's a misunderstanding in almost everything he says. In almost everything he says. Like even what he says about objective morality. He says, he apparently, when he says objective morality, he says, apparently what Christian apologists mean by objective morality is what's in the green there. No, never, not once, ever, right?
No, it's normative ethics.
Yeah,
it's not meta ethics.
I've been in debates with atheists before where they seem to think that what we mean by objective morality is things that everyone agrees on, or things that most people agree on. Guys, the idea of objective morality or an objective moral standard or objective moral duties or something like that is, it wouldn't matter if every last person on the entire planet rejected it. It would still be objectively true. It would be an objective moral truth. In other words, if every person on the planet tomorrow decided that it's a good thing to torture old ladies for fun, if it's objectively morally wrong to torture old ladies for fun, it wouldn't matter what everyone believed. It matters what is morally true. So he says apparently they think that that the stuff in the yellow is not objectively moral because they can't, where it's not in the green area of maximizing well-being or something like that. No, anything that's objectively moral is objectively moral, whether other people agree to it or not, whether other ethical systems said that it's good or not is irrelevant. So I'm just pointing that out because, again, every single step of the argument seems to be not understanding the language he's using or our position.
I just want to add to that. So the idea of the objective morality is we have this system, these standards, we have something that exists beyond us. So it transcends generations, transcends people. It's something to do what's right. And if you've noticed the way that our social beings have evolved over time, we actually seem to be going towards a standard and getting better in a lot of ways. So some would argue that our cultures are much more humane than they were, say, 300-400 years ago, or over 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. We're moving towards something better. Well, what we are is we're moving towards our own moral standard, and our moral standard that we're moving towards is Jesus Christ.
It has nothing to do with moral ontology anyway, so it has nothing to do with the moral argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so should we continue, or did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
Nope, let's go.
All right, here we go. Not too much longer. I have about 2 minutes left of this video, but let's see where it's going.
A desire to avoid pain and to seek thriving are entirely survival traits. They're fully grounded in biology. Oh, you might want to argue that.
Oh, this is why I was thinking that he was actually putting his position forward. These things are grounded in biology, the basic things. But let me go and replay that part. I'm going back to.
Again, let's recall this idea of grounded in biology. That is something that a lot of atheists like to do. They like to say that everything is grounded in evolution. However, evolution does not explain our conscience and the fact that we have this conscience that tells us a lot of times to act counter to our own survival. When you see someone on the battlefield who takes a bullet for another warrior, you can basically say, well, this person clearly took the bullet. This is not about survival. This is about doing something that's mimicking what Jesus Christ did, who essentially took a bullet for humanity. So I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you for coming by. I really appreciate that you listened to this video. I'm going to put the links to all of the videos in the description so that you can get a hold of the longer videos with David Wood. I'd also recommend going and listening to Inspiring Philosophies stuff or Dr. Michael Brown stuff. It's very fascinating. They got a lot of people out there doing some great things. So thanks again.